There are places on this earth where the thin air itself seems to hold a memory, and the Altiplano of Bolivia is one of them. At nearly 13,000 feet above the sea, amid the whispering grasses and a cobalt sky that feels too close, the ruins of Tiwanaku lie scattered like the bones of a forgotten god. Modern archaeology calls it Tiwanaku, a civilization that rose and fell long before the Inca painted their empire across the Andes. The monolith is a single rectangular slab cracked across its upper corner and carved with a precision that seems to belong to a much later age. Across its surface, a frieze of winged figures, condor-headed attendants, and intricate geometric motifs converge upon a central weeping deity. He holds a staff in each hand, rays of stylized light erupting from his head, and from his eyes fall tears that look like carved pendants of sorrow. For centuries, local Aymara people have passed whispered stories of an ancient city built in a single night by giants, only to be shattered by a great flood of divine wrath. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they were shown the ruins by the Inca, who themselves regarded Tiwanaku as a sacred, primordial place, already ancient beyond memory. But it was not until the early 20th century that an eccentric German-Bolivian scholar, Arthur Poznański, would devote his entire life to reading the celestial message locked inside this stone. Poznański declared that the Gateway of the Sun was not merely a monument, it was a complex, functional calendar, a machine in stone designed to track the heavens with a startling, almost impossible accuracy. He knelt in the dust and meticulously measured the angles of the carved niches, the gaze of the weeping god, and the orientation of the temple platform called Kalasasaya. What he proposed sent a shockwave through the academic world and still lingers in the twilight zone between scientific fact and profound anomaly. Based on the subtle, gradual wobble of the Earth's axis, a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes, Poznański calculated a date for the calendar's original alignment. His chalkboard math pointed not to the accepted era of a few thousand years ago, but to a staggering 15,000 years before the Common Era. If he was correct, this stone observatory was carved while great sheets of ice still covered vast stretches of the northern world, at a time when mainstream history insists humans were simple hunter-gatherers. To understand the depth of this enigma, you must first trace a finger across the cold, weathered face of the stone and read the language of its symbols. The central figure, often called the staff god or the weeping god, is flanked by 3 rows of smaller winged beings, each one a profile running in a frieze toward the center. Every condor head, every curled wing, and every circular depression, he argued, was a precise marker for a sunrise, a solstice, or a lunar phase. He claimed that the calendar encoded a year of 12 months, each starting with a new moon, a startlingly accurate lunisolar system carved into enduring rock. The Kalasasaya platform, a sunken temple of immaculately fitted red sandstone and green andesite, formed the physical viewing device for this celestial clock. Standing at its center during the winter solstice, the first rays of the sun would, in Poznański's model, slice precisely through a specific corner of the stone gate. Today, that alignment is off by a significant fraction of a degree, a drift that he argued could only have accumulated over an expanse of time that dwarfed all known civilizations. Mainstream archaeologists unequivocally reject this pre-Ice Age date, arguing that Poznański made critical errors in his surveying and astronomical assumptions. They point to carbon-dated organic material beneath the temple platform, which rather firmly anchors the site's construction to the period between the 4th and 10th centuries CE. The iconic gate itself, they note, is not even standing in its original position. It was found toppled and relocated over a century ago, potentially breaking any precise original alignment. Where others see a weathered calendar of immense age, the established view sees a magnificent ceremonial portal through which the sun defined the ritual year of a later Andean culture. Yet, the sheer technical artistry of the stonework refuses to let the controversy die quietly in an academic journal. The andesite blocks of Tiwanaku are fitted together with a seamlessness that rejects a razor blade, using complex, recessed joints and metallic cramps poured directly into the stone. The quarries for the green andesite lie across the vast, shimmering expanse of Lake Titicaca, tens of kilometers away, raising the profound question of transport across water and altitude. The gateway of the sun itself is estimated to weigh nearly 10 tons, dragged from a quarry and then intricately carved with a flat, low-relief technique that admits no margin for error. A single slip of the artisan's chisel and a date code for a solstice sunrise would have been permanently erased from the stone's memory. Deep in the silence of the high plain, where the air is so thin that the stars pierce the night like icy needles, one feels a disorienting collapse of time. You can press your palm against the stone that Poznański touched, now blackened by lichen and centuries of harsh ultraviolet light, and feel the vibration of a lost conviction. He was not a detached observer. He was a man possessed by the belief that history had gotten its own story deeply and arrogantly wrong. In the quiet, you can almost hear the mathematical fury of his arguments. A man trying to convince a world that human genius was not a recent invention. Was he a visionary who had glimpsed the true depth of prehistory, or a meticulous obsessive who bent the celestial mechanics to fit a beautiful, impossible dream? The question haunts the site because even if his 15,000-year date is a phantom, the function of the intricate frieze as a timekeeping device remains remarkably compelling. Between the condor-headed attendants, Poznański identified what he called splendid white rabbits and profiles of other animals, possibly representing star constellations or lunar houses. He interpreted the round markings beneath the frieze as a system of counting, a tangible record of the days ticking by, a stone almanac set against the eternal trajectory of the sun. Some modern archaeoastronomers have cautiously revisited his data and found that while the extreme date is untenable, the site's orientation to the solstices is undeniable. The very walls of Kalasasaya form a precise rectangle aligned to the cardinal axis, with solstitial sunrise and sunset markers built directly into the architecture. The builders of Tiwanaku were, without any doubt, meticulous watchers of the sky, priests of a cosmic order where the condor, the puma, and the serpent danced in celestial cycles. At the heart of their cosmology was Viracocha, the creator god who rose from Lake Titicaca, wept for humanity, and vanished across the Pacific. A divine figure echoed in the weeping stone. The tears on the gate's central figure are not a symbol of human sadness, some scholars suggest, but a representation of life-giving rain, the celestial tears that feed the highland crops. Thus the calendar may have been less an abstract clock and more a sacred agricultural covenant, predicting the floods and the droughts that meant survival or extinction. Yet the sheer audacity of Poznański's Ice Age calendar has spawned an entire parallel mythology, one that mainstream science has spent a century trying to pull back from the abyss. Darker, more speculative voices have linked the Sun Gate to a lost global maritime empire, a white-skinned race of culture-bearers, or even utterly destroyed antediluvian civilizations. These are the shadows that cling to the mystery, the fog that obscures the genuine archaeological wonder of what the Tiwanaku people actually achieved. We must navigate carefully between the clean, measured facts of the radiocarbon lab and the haunting, untestable possibility that time has erased far more than we dare to imagine. The truth is disorienting enough on its own terms. A brilliant culture built a monumental temple observatory at an altitude that makes the heart pound and the mind reel. They observed the point on the horizon where the sun turned on its solstitial path, and they locked that fleeting moment into a 10-ton carving of a weeping god. Then, around 1,000 years ago, a devastating, prolonged drought, climate data now confirms, strangled their irrigation systems and ripped the heart from their empire. The Great Pyramids of Akapana, the sunken courts, and the carved gates were abandoned, swallowed by silence and the relentless, scouring winds. By the time the Inca stumbled upon the ruins, perhaps 4 centuries later, the original name of the city, the language of the carvers, and the precise rituals had already been forgotten. The Inca, masterful astronomers in their own right, incorporated what they found into their own imperial origin myth, claiming it was here that the first humans were created. This layering of forgetfulness is, for an investigator, as thick and bewildering as a sudden fog rolling off Lake Titicaca at dawn. In the labyrinth of interpretations, even the gateway's purpose as a pure calendar has been challenged, with some arguing it was merely a dynastic monument, a portrait of a king god. But if it was only a political statement, why encode the precise measures of the lunar month and the solar year into the very wings of its attending figures? The fingers of the weeping god are arranged in specific, repetitive counts. The staffs he holds are segmented like measuring rods. The horizontal crack that now bisects the stone, a violent shattering in the distant past, acts as a cruel metaphor for our fractured understanding of this world. It is as if history was a continuous sentence, and someone has torn the page in half, leaving us to guess at the syntax of the missing clauses. Where the crack severs the lower register, the count of days is broken. A cosmic clock stopped mid-tick, perhaps forever. The human mind recoils from such a permanent erasure, and so it spins theory after theory to fill the void left by the shattered glyphs. One theory posits that the gate was never meant to stand upright as a portal, but was originally laid horizontally as a viewer's guide for tracking the stars moving across the zenith. Another reconstructs the entire platform as a giant human-made horizon, where the sun's rebirth at the winter solstice was a promise that the cosmic order would not dissolve into chaos. As we sift through these clashing visions, the cold, unyielding stone remains the only true witness, refusing to confirm or deny a single human hypothesis. The seduction of the Tiwanaku calendar is not merely intellectual. It is a psychological mirror reflecting our profound terror of being a forgetful, amnesiac species. Men like Poznansky devoted decades, fortune, and reputation, hunched over dusty theodolites and star charts, desperate to prove that our ancestors were not brutes. There is a particular kind of madness that settles upon those who stare too long at the gateway of the sun, a madness born of looking into the face of a god who will not speak, a rite of hyper-diffusionism and miscalculated obliquity of the ecliptic. But these sterile terms only mask the raw human heartbeat beneath the inquiry. The Aymara farmers who still walk their llama herds past the ruins do not need carbon dating to feel its age. They call it Tepe Kala, the stone at the center of the world. They sense that the place is a pivot, a navel, and the calendar is simply the visible pulse of that sacred geography. For them, the The tears on the god's face are not a puzzle to be solved with mathematics, but a constant, living presence in a landscape where the earth meets the divine. This dichotomy, the cold obsession of the Western chronologist versus the intrinsic, felt knowledge of the indigenous caretaker, defines the modern struggle for the site's soul. How do you date a whisper? How do you carbon test a profound sense of sacred terror in the presence of a carved eye? The tools of the archaeologist can only measure what remains, not the colossal, terrifying weight of what has been completely lost to the acids of time. We tell ourselves that history is a narrative with a clean arc, but here, on the Altiplano, the story fractures into 1,000 sharp shards of andesite. The stone calendar endures not because it gives us answers, but because it asks the single most unsettling question that a ruin can pose. It asks whether the industrial civilization we take such pride in is truly the pinnacle, or merely another, more fragile, wave in a cycle of amnesia. Look upon the cracked, weeping god for too long, and the audacity of our certainty begins to fade into the fine, cold highland mist. The sun sets behind the gate of the sun, and for a brief moment, a shard of orange light aligns with the broken corner, a fleeting ghost of the old solstitial magic. It is a performance that has no audience but the wind and the distant, snow-capped peak of Mount Illimani, standing watch like a silent, frozen deity. In that ephemeral flash of alignment, you feel the true terror of the unfinished equation. A clock designed for a sky that has shifted, a timekeeping that has run out of time. The stone has been cracked, the platform has settled, the stars have drifted, and the language of the condor-headed figures remains locked in a syntax we can only partially decode. Darkness returns to the high plain with the suddenness of a black velvet curtain falling, and the gate becomes a void, a rectangular absence against a field of emerging stars. The Milky Way, which the Tiwanaku may have called the celestial river of Viracocha, arches overhead with a staggering, indifferent brilliance. We are left standing on the shore of a vast, nocturnal ocean of ignorance, holding a pebble of knowledge that Poznański carved from the cliff of doubt. The mystery will not be solved by a single paper or a new scanning technology. It exists to remind us that human memory is a frail, guttering candle in a hurricane of deep time. The gate is a monument to measurement, but its deepest lesson is about the unmeasurable, the vast silent stretches of prehistory that will never yield up their dead. To accept the stone calendar of Tiwanaku is to accept that we are a species with a profound, incurable compulsion to carve our knowledge into stone, hoping it outlives the collapse of our worlds. And if we are lucky enough to be read 15 millennia later, we will likely be misread by the desperate, passionate dreamers who come after us. The weeping god weeps still, not in sorrow, but perhaps in the pure, silent, ironical mirth of a creator who knows the secret of the universe and has absolutely no intention of telling it. Return your gaze from the abyss of the sky and look one last time upon the cold, patient face of the monolith. It is not a relic of the dead. It is a question that is still alive, still pulsing, still waiting for a future mind, humble enough to merely listen rather than calculate. The wind picks up across the Altiplano, filling the ancient plazas with a low, keening hum, and somewhere in its resonance, the gate continues its silent, perpetual count.